Hello, welcome to NCARB Live, and thank you for joining us for our session on the pathway to becoming an architect. I'm Martin Smith, Assistant Vice President, Experience in Education here at NCARB. I've been with NCARB for about 10 years now, and I'm licensed in the state of New York as an architect.
Hi everyone, my name is Michelle Cohn, and I'm also glad to be with you here today. I am Assistant Vice President for Examination here at NCARB, and I've been here for about 5 years now. And I am also a licensed architect here in Washington, D.C.
So thank you for joining us, and whether you're starting AXP or getting ready to jump in and start taking your exams, we're here to have some helpful information that will hopefully help you stay on that path. Do keep in mind you can submit questions at any time through the chat tool on the screen, and we'll try to get to as many as we can during the session. If you need to sign off early, you can watch the full webinar at any time later on when we post it on our YouTube channel.
Now let's talk for a minute about why are we here? Why is NCARB talking to you about licensure? Well, NCARB is the National Council of Architectural Registration Boards, and we are a nonprofit association of the 55 state and jurisdictional licensing boards here in the U.S. Now, it's those boards of architecture that will actually grant candidates their license to practice architecture. But each of those boards can have slightly different requirements for how to become an architect. So that's where NCARB comes in. We work with those boards of architecture to streamline and simplify the path as much as possible so that when you become licensed in one jurisdiction, you'll more than likely be able to quickly and easily get licensed in another jurisdiction. Now, how can you learn about all of these different requirements? Well, on NCARB's website, we have a licensing requirements tool, and this is a great place to start your journey. So you can see on the screen here, with this licensing requirements tool, you can pick a different jurisdiction in which you might want to get licensed and learn about the specific requirements in that jurisdiction. We also have the contact information for each of those state boards in that licensing requirements tool, and additional information about reciprocal licensure, licensure in another jurisdiction, requirements for practice, registration renewal. There's a lot of really helpful information within that licensing requirements tool. So definitely encourage you to get started there. Now, one of those requirements for licensure is education. For many people, that's their first step on the way to becoming an architect. Now, a lot of jurisdictions do require a degree from a NAB-accredited School of Architecture. NAB is the National Architectural Accrediting Board, and they accredit schools of architecture, different degree programs. So for a lot of candidates, getting that NAB-accredited degree is the first step, but it doesn't have to be limiting. There are some jurisdictions that will accept non-accredited degrees for licensure, oftentimes with additional experience in addition to that degree. So again, starting with the licensing requirements tool is a great first step for a lot of candidates to understand the type of degree that they're interested in pursuing or the type of degree that they already have and how that will help them along the path to licensure.
Thanks, Michelle. So we're talk about AXP, the Architectural Experience Program. So this program now launched about 3 years ago, so it is still relatively new in its new version. Some of you may remember IDP, the Intern Development Program. But there's been some updates to this program. One of the big things is sort of focusing on the tasks that are necessary to competently practice architecture. So when you're getting ready to start on your experience program, or if you're in the middle of it, going through the process, it is very important to look at each of the areas and the tasks that are associated to those areas. Because that is your roadmap to ultimately practicing architecture. Now, we also have some other great resources that can help you along AXP. And that is the expectations document that is for you and your supervisor to sort of look through to help understand your expectations. And it's important to have those meetings with your supervisor before you get started to sort of outline and make a plan on how to navigate through AXP. Now, with regards to AXP, you are going to have to, there are certain types of experiences that qualify. Most people do go through Experience Setting A, which is working for an architect who's engaged in the lawful practice of architecture.
Yep, and that's what I did. But on my path to becoming an architect, I worked for an architecture firm here in DC, earned actually all of my, well, it was IDP at the time, but I earned all of my IDP hours within that firm and was able to quickly get through that part of the program on the way to licensure.
And that is one of those things. Most people just work for an architecture firm or an architect and gain all their experience to finish AXP. Do keep in mind that you do have to gain nearly half of your experience through that method. However, there are other ways to gain experience, and this is what we call experience setting O, other opportunities. This could be working for a foreign architect, doing design competitions if you're not currently working, or do the community-based design center collaboratives, which is a volunteer opportunity. Do keep in mind these other opportunities you will be limited to how much can qualify for AXP, but it is a great opportunity for those who are not currently working in that traditional architecture office or for an architect. Now, what do you do? Now that you have getting this experience, what should you be doing going through that process? And this is where we have the sort of six experience areas. They sort of follow the process of a project: practice management, project management, and then the sort of standard steps to a project being completed. Now, if you do notice, there are a number of tasks associated to each of those areas. However, it's not necessarily a direct correlation to number of hours to the tasks. And everyone's going to be a little bit different when they're going through this process.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And every firm is going to afford you different experiences and different opportunities. And so for candidates who work at firms doing a lot of different types of work, you might be able to get experience in all six of those areas working under that one firm. Other candidates might find it beneficial to switch firms in order to get more experience in a certain area that they're just not getting at that first firm that they're working at. It's really important, though, as a candidate, to advocate for yourself and speak to your supervisor and say, look, AXP is really important to me because licensure is really important to me, and I'm just not getting all the experience that I need with the current projects that I'm working on. Maybe are there some other projects that you could work on to get some additional experience, even just tagging along to different meetings or site visits. And so speaking up as a candidate is going to be really important to fulfilling all of those requirements in all six AXP areas.
And as you noticed, there was an hour requirement, that there's a certain number of hours you need to get in each of the areas, and a total of 3740. That being said, don't limit yourself to just those minimum hour requirements. Document all experience that qualifies for AXP up till the point of licensure, because then that will make it possible for you to meet all the state's jurisdictional requirements. Now, this is where you heard Michelle say in the beginning about how every jurisdiction is a little bit different in setting their requirements. And AXP is a good example of that. Here you'll see a map that shows all the states in blue. All they require is AXP for the purposes of completing their experience requirement. The other ones that have hatches or different colors, they may have additional experience requirements. And that's where I was going back to. When you're submitting experience, submit all stuff that qualifies, because that will help you meet all those additional experience requirements that jurisdictions may have. And with regards to reporting experience, you do need to keep in mind that there is a time limit to when you need to put those experiences in. And that is the reporting requirement. If you want 100% of your experience to qualify, you need to submit it within 8 months of gaining it. Anything older than 8 months also qualifies. However, you'll be limited to half that experience to qualify, and that's up to 5 years back. Anything older than 5 years doesn't qualify through the hour method, but we can talk about the portfolio, which is an opportunity for people who have a lot of experience older than 5 years, but are unable to finish through the hour method. You can look at pursuing the portfolio. Now, the nice part is NCARB's done a lot of things to make this process a lot more smoother. I know when I was going through my process, I'd had paper forms.
Oh, yeah.
Where yours was like.
Spreadsheets. Yep, for sure.
And it is one of those things, we made these things a lot more streamlined. But this shouldn't negate you from having those conversations with your supervisor. Now, when you do the online reporting system through NCARB Record or through the MyAXP app, these are all great tools and resources to help you navigate through this experience program.
I think, and I'll just add on there one other important aspect. Even though all of these tools are online or on your smartphone, it's really important to just have that conversation with your supervisor. So having that face-to-face conversation just, at the coffee machine or as part of a performance review or somewhere else can be a really effective way to, again, advocate for yourself, remind your supervisor of the experience that you'd like to gain as part of AXP and as part of just becoming a knowledgeable and experienced architect.
And so we just went briefly over a lot of the AXP requirements and sort of expectations. I highly recommend you go to the AXP guidelines to get the more details, as well as when you're having those conversations with your supervisor, pull this up on the screen. Make sure you're looking at the current document, as well as those expectation documents, which I referenced in the beginning. These are important tools to help you navigate this program and make sure you get what you need to ultimately practice architecture.
Well, Martin, we have a few questions that have come in regarding AXP. So we're going to take a few questions now before we move on to the next topic. So question from Mario Am I still able to get work experience under a civil engineer licensed in California for AXP credit? Or does it only have to be from an architect?
So, great question. Now, when I was talking about Experience Setting O, there's one opportunity within Experience Setting O called Other Work Experience under a Licensed Professionals. You can gain experience working for a foreign architect in another country, working for an engineer, landscape architect, or an architect who's not currently practicing architecture. Now, you are limited to 1860 hours. That's nearly half of your experience requirement, but it is a great opportunity, and it's typically a year, is how people like to think about it, working full-time at that place. So yes, you would submit that experience to the engineer you're working under. They would put their licensing information into their end, and then they can approve those experiences that you gained at that engineering office.
Great, thanks, that's really helpful. Let's see, now Devin asks, do continuing education credits, such as vendor tutorials and demonstrations, count towards the continuing ed portion of AXP hours?
So yes, if it's an HSW course that qualifies for AIA HSW, and you have an AIA transcript, so either a member of AIA or a student AIS school, you can count those continuing ed courses towards AIA, towards your AXP. You are limited to I believe it's 10 hours. This is where I go look at the AXP guidelines, because all of a sudden I just realized I blanked on how much qualifies for each area. But you are limited in each area. And when you're looking at the course, try to see which tasks does this associate with in that area, and that helps you assign it.
That's really helpful, because even though it might feel like, oh, it's only an hour, is it worth putting in there? An hour here, an hour there, it all adds up. And again, it's all really useful education that will hopefully help you in your career. Let's see here. I'm going to take another question here from Laura. I'm currently working on the process to report my hours. However, I worked for a design build company for 3 years and tried to submit my hours through setting O, but it only lets me submit 320 hours. Any tips for earning AXP credit for that work?
So it depends what you're doing in the design build office. If there is no one there that has any type of license with regards to engineer, landscape architect, or architect, then you may be limited to just 320 hours. If you are actually out building a project, doing site work, constructing the building, you could put that experience under construction work, because that also does not require a license as well. However, it is considered swinging the hammer, so you get an additional 320. But if all the work you do is more design, more architecture related, then yes, you would be limited to 320 hours. And even though that's a great experience, and if you enjoy working there, keep working there, at some point you're going to need to make that plan to get the experience that will ultimately lead you to getting your license.
Yeah.
And some places will find ways to work that out with you. Either they share you with the architect's office that they might coordinate with. And that's ways to get some of that experience setting A that you ultimately need.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Martin. I think we're going to do one more AXP question, and then we'll move on. Rose asks, did IDP hours convert to AXP hours, and do my hours ever expire?
So yes, anyone who had hours in IDP, they did convert to AXP. Now there were some things with regards to elective hours and things related to that. They may not have directly correlated to AXP, because AXP is about the required hours. So that being said, those additional hours help with those additional experience requirements that some states may have. So even though they don't expire, they're still in the system, but with regards to AXP, we did move over those required hours from IDP to AXP. Now, do hours expire? No, they never expire. Once you have them submitted and they're ultimately approved and they meet the requirements of AXP, they'll be there till the day you no longer need them, which is, you'll have other issues at that point, most likely. But,
Great. Well, thanks, Martin. That was, and thanks to all of you for sending in your questions. We're going to transition now to talk about the exam. But again, if you have additional AXP questions, feel free to continue to submit those, and we'll get to more later if we have time. But also, if you have questions about the exam, we're going to be talking about that now. So hopefully, we'll answer some questions as we go. So the exam, ARE 5.0, is made up of 6 divisions. And hopefully these look familiar to you. They're the same as the 6 experience areas that Martin talked about in AXP. And so again, practice management. Do you know how to run an architectural practice? Project management, that overarching idea of how do you run a project from start to finish? And then programming and analysis through construction and evaluation, following the path of a typical architectural project throughout all of its phases. Now we get some questions sometimes about, well, where is kind of the end point of one division and the start point of the next division? Well, we sometimes talk about programming and analysis as being that kind of concept phase. You're just, you're doing initial programming, maybe site analysis. It's those just figuring out what this project is type phase. Project planning and design really starts to move into schematic design, maybe the beginning part of design development, when you're just starting to select what your building materials are going to be, as opposed to project development and documentation, which is now when you're starting to integrate all of those materials and systems together. So this is like heavy into construction documentation. And then finally, construction and evaluation, of course, is constructing the building, post-occupancy evaluation. Was this project successful?
So I do go. We do get a lot of questions in outreach about where do we start, and then it comes up on the community.
Good question.
And that's really much really connected to an individual, where you're at, where you are in your experience, as well as where you feel most confident or the way you want to navigate it. I go. Nice thing about with AXP and ARE having the same titles, you sometimes can say, well, I've finished that area. I feel confident in all the tasks. That maybe I'll start with that area of the exam.
Yep, that's a great
Other
approach.
people may go, well, this division is very broad, and it's a lot of connected to studying these documents that I can find value in that, and maybe start with that because it's connected to a lot of other things.
Right.
But that's where you can actually have conversations with people that are currently testing to get their feedback on what they found their path was.
Right. Yeah, the main thing to remember is that you don't have to approach the exams in the order that we list them in. You can take them in any order you want, as long as you pass all 6 of them. So what can you expect when you actually get to the test center? Well, the ARE is delivered at Prometric test centers all across the US and around the world. And when you sit down at the test center for your exam, you're going to see a short introduction screen, which reminds you about the ARE candidate agreement. The main crux of that is all exam content is confidential, and that you should not be sharing that information or disclosing the information or trying to access the information outside of the test center. After that, you'll move into the timed portion of your test. You'll see first discrete items, and now some testing lingo for everyone. So items is what we refer to as questions. So each of the questions on your exam, we talk about those as items. And a discrete item is one that is a standalone question. So it's, you see the question, you answer it, you move on to the next question. One question doesn't have anything to do with the next one. Towards the end of your exam is when we'll have the case study items. So as many of you know, everyone will have 1 or 2 case studies on each division of ARE 5.0 with 10 to 15 questions or items per case study. So you'll have that opportunity towards the end part of your exam to get into the case studies. You'll want to read the overview of the case study, familiarize yourself with the different reference materials that are provided as part of that case study, and then answer each of the case study items. If you choose, and I know for some candidates, they'd rather just get the case studies over with at the beginning, you do have that opportunity to navigate to the case studies at the front end of your exam and then do the discrete items at the end. Once you finish up all the questions in your exam, then you'll have a short conclusion, reminder of that really important candidate agreement, a short survey about your testing experience, and then finally an opportunity to see your provisional score in the test center. So for a lot of candidates, that's just a great relief to get through the exam and then know right away how you did. Now, how do you actually get started studying, right? We talked about what the exam is, what you can expect at the test center, where to begin. Well, one of the best resources you can begin with is the ARE handbook. So this is available for free on our website. It is a pretty hefty document, and we really go into a lot of detail there about what you can expect on the exam. For each of the 6 divisions, what's the key content that you can expect to be tested on, and what are the key references that you might want to take a look at while you're studying.
So when you're going through this document, you're going to sit there and go, well, we have these books in our office, or I've been familiar with this either through my school and documents that we had. Now, a lot of them are very highly technical, a lot of those documents, so you're not going to necessarily just sit there and go through and read them all, be ready for the test. But I like to look at those as being a reference guide to understand the content that is being covered.
Yeah.
And definitely, again, Don't overstudy necessarily, because it can be very easy to sit there and think, I got to go through this big pile of books.
Oh, yeah.
But it's more about references.
Right, absolutely. We're certainly not suggesting that you read dozens and dozens of books, but we are suggesting that if you have some of these books, they're a great place to start. For some canons, they say, I don't get it the way it's presented in this book, but gee, there's some other books here that are also recommended for this division. Maybe I'll take a look at those as well. And so there's a lot of great resources that are recommended. The other thing I want to point out in the handbook is we have a lot of sample questions too. So within each, the handbook is divided up into the 6 divisions. Within each of those divisions, we talk about sample questions, and not just what the right answer is, but why the right answer is right, why the wrong answer is wrong, where key references where each of those questions come from. So there's a lot in there to get you used to the types of questions you can expect to see on the exam. Now, we've got some other great resources from NCARB, and one of the ones that I want to point out is the 5.0 community. So this is an online forum. You can access it through your NCARB record. And it is truly an online community for candidates at all different phases of their testing. We've got candidates asking questions about, again, study references, about sample questions that they're looking for some more information on, looking to form study groups, find study partners, just getting general advice about, gosh, how to even prepare for test day. I hate testing, and any advice on getting ready for that mentally. So we've got a lot of great candidates helping each other out and cheering each other on. NCARB moderators, including myself, are on there as well. So you can be sure that if you're asking a question about the exam, you can be sure that you're getting correct information straight from NCARB. Now, another really helpful resource is the demonstration exam. Again, available to you through your NCARB record. And this is truly what you can expect to see at the test center. It's not a full exam, it's only 20 items, but you really get a sense of the look and feel of the exam, what you can expect on test day, including those introductory screens, understanding how the items will appear on the screen, what case studies look like, taking the time to understand how to navigate through case study resources, how to use some of our newer item types like hotspots and drag and place, even understanding how to get to that exam summary button so that if you want to get to the case studies at the beginning of your exam instead of waiting till the end, you can understand the process for doing that. So I really ask all candidates, take a look at that demo exam, understand what you're going to run into at the test center, and really get to that test center prepared and confident about just answering all those questions. Now, for a lot of candidates, you might fail 1 or 2 divisions on your way to completing the exam. That is nothing to be scared of. Hopefully it's something that you're able to bounce back from. And the good news is that when you do get that failing score report, we provide some descriptive feedback for you on the second page of that. So we've got a screenshot here where you can see what a passing score report would look like. If that was a fail, that little chart there would actually be on the second page. And you can see there's a lot of blue dots and gray dots. Well, the blue dots under level 1 and 2 mean that you've performed, met expectations. And the gray dots in levels 3 and 4 mean that you haven't met expectations. I mean, that's what the footnote says. But Martin, how would you advise a candidate with their descriptive feedback?
So with a candidate who would have a fail report like this that has this little chart, the things that are in the blue area, you can say, well, you got some base knowledge of this. Level 1, you might go, well, maybe you don't need to do too much with that one because you seem to perform pretty well. Level 2, you're going to look at that and go, hey, maybe put some more questions related to that if you're doing study questions, or look at the content area in the handbook and see which things do you want to pull some more stuff in to build up our knowledge. Level 3, you definitely want to spend more time on those because, again, you're just below that bar. And if you had any level 4s, you definitely want to spend stuff on that. And keep in mind, just don't look at the levels. Look at the number of content covered. So if you have a content area that's very heavily covered in that division, and you got a level 3 or level 4 on that, you may want to focus most of your studying just in that area. This is, again, going back to making a plan. This is what a lot of this process is having a plan. And when this does arrive and you get this as descriptive feedback, use that to design your plan going forward when you get ready to do the retake.
Right, that descriptive feedback really should be a resource for you as you prepare to retest. So definitely, take that deep breath. It's going to be okay. Pick yourself back up again and use that information to guide you as you prepare for your retest. Now, one last resource I just want to bring to everyone's attention is the ARE 5.0 guidelines. So this is a much thinner document than the handbook that we talked about a moment ago, but equally important. So the guidelines has a lot of that operational information. How do I sign up for a test? What happens if there's a technical issue at the test center? How do I get my score after I take the test? So a lot of that information is in there. Be sure to take a look at that. It's good to familiarize yourself with those processes and procedures. You can see some information there on your screen. Again, that is available for free on our website. And that is some key reading, just so you make sure that you're familiar with the process of actually being at the test center. Martin, do we have any questions about the exam here?
We have a couple. Thank you all for posting your questions. We're really excited to be able to answer a few at this moment. So from Alex, some states requirements say you can begin the ARE before the AXP is completed. Is this true? Could someone complete the ARE before finishing their AXP?
Oh, sure. Yes. Most jurisdictions allow for concurrent testing and experience, which means that, you could definitely, if you're really a go-getter, ready to get into there to the test center and test, you can definitely finish the AXP. I have former colleagues who've been in that position and finish their exam and then just need to kind of keep working for a little bit longer to finish gaining their experience. I think that most candidates, it's the other way around, but it is totally valid to get through the exam quickly and then finish your experience.
So from Ronaldo, is there any reason the year-long waiting period before you can retake a test after failing it 3 times?
Okay, so let me just review that policy, make sure we're all on the same page about it, and then we'll answer the question there. So if you fail an exam, you need to wait 60 days from the date that you originally took the exam before you're able to get back into the test center and retest in that same division. You could be testing in other divisions during that 60-day wait, but it is 60 days in between attempts of the same division. If you fail it a second time, then again, there's a 60-day wait before you can retest for one more time. So that would be your third attempt. If you have failed it for those 3 attempts, then you will need to wait because you can only test 3 times in the same division within a 12-month period. So that's a running 12-month period. So just as an example, if you tested on January 1st and you fail, and then you wait 60 days, so let's say March 1st you test again. If you wait 60 days, then May 1st would be your third attempt. If you fail again, then you would need to wait to January 1st of the following year. So it's not 12 months with no testing at all. It's 3 attempts within a 12-month window. Now, the reason for that, I think that was really the crux of the question, is all about test security. So that's a key consideration for NCARB, as with any organization that delivers licensure exams, is test security. And it's really wanting to make sure that we don't overexpose exam content and protecting the exam so that it remains a valid, legitimate assessment, which really benefits all of us within the architecture profession. So again, those requirements are due to test security, and those are spelled out in the guidelines if anyone needs to get a refresher on them.
So we have one more question here
Okay.
before we move on to the next content. Is it possible to get additional info regarding test results besides the score report? The score report is too vague to advise us what would need further studying.
Okay, so we get that question sometimes from candidates as well. And unfortunately, we can't give you the information about specifically which questions you got wrong, which questions you got right. Unfortunately, we're not able to deliver that level of detail to candidates. If you have a concern that maybe your score report is inaccurate, you can request a score verification, and that is a process that you would request of NCARB. It's $100. And what would happen in that process is our NCARB staff would review your testing results, review your score report, make sure that the two of them are in line, and then be able to confirm with you that yes, your score report is valid. And these really are the areas where you are underperforming and where you might want to focus your studies as you prepare for a retest. Now, some jurisdictions do allow for a review and challenge process. And again, that varies by jurisdiction, but in the jurisdictions where it is allowed, you would contact your state board to get more information about the exact process. Typically, you would need to go to the state board office where you will be able to review the questions that you got wrong on the exam. Now, you won't be given information about what the correct answer is. It's just purely an opportunity to look at the questions that you got wrong. You'll see, those just that subset of questions. You won't be able to take notes. So again, it's kind of like being in the test center, that it is a secure environment. You can't bring anything in, you can't take anything out, but you just have that opportunity to review how you had done on that, the areas where you were underperforming, which again might provide you some additional guidance as you prepare for your retest. So it sounds like we're going to move on to the next section of our presentation. And again, if you have any additional AXP questions, then AXP or ARE questions, feel free to keep sending those in through the chat tool on your screen.
Excuse me while I get my throat back. So let's say you just finished your education, finished experience, and finished the exam.
So
my throat's a little messy at the moment. I'll let you jump in.
So I'll jump in here. What happens when you finish all of those pieces? Well, you get your license, so that's really great. Like we mentioned at the beginning, each jurisdiction is going to have might have slightly different requirements for licensure, so you want to make sure that you're aware of those particularities. But once you've completed your education, experience, and exam components, congratulations, you can get that license in your initial jurisdiction for where you've applied for licensure. Once you have that first license, then we hope that you'll want to apply for your NCARB certificate with NCARB. And the certificate demonstrates that you've completed that, as you see on your screen there, that common path to certification. And it is thanks to the certificate that you can then quickly and easily apply for reciprocal licensure in any of our other jurisdictions as well.
Now keep in mind, if you don't have the degree from a NAB program or finish some of the other paths to licensure, it's always good to check out the certification guidelines, because there may be some alternatives that allow you to ultimately achieve certification, but there may be some time frames that you have to wait a little bit longer before you're eligible for that. And with that, we can take some questions.
And let's see here. Okay, we've got a question that just came in from Madison. I'll read this one while Martin's still recovering. Okay, so Madison asks, no matter when you start the ARE, before or after AXP, the 5-year rolling clock still applies, correct? Also, does the 5-year rolling clock start before a passed test or a failed test too? Okay, so there's another policy item that let's just cover that again before we get into the question itself. So the 5-year rolling clock is a requirement that you complete, that you pass all 6 divisions of the exam within a 5-year window. And so what that means is that if you, back to our example from earlier, if you take your first test, January 1st, 2020, really kicking off the new year right, you take your first test and you pass it. That's awesome. You now have until December 31 of 2025, so our 5-year window, to take and pass all of the other divisions. If you're unable to pass all 6 divisions within that 5-year time frame, then your first passed test will roll off, so that's the rolling part of the rolling clock, and you would need to retake that first division. Now keep in mind that NCARB reminds you frequently of where you are within your 5-year rolling clock. So every time you get a score report, every time you log into your record to sign up for another test, you'll see that clock in your record on your score report, reminding you that you have so many years, months, days, etc., to complete all 6 of your divisions. And so answering Madison's specific question here is that yes, the 5-year rolling clock applies no matter when you start the ARE. If you finished AXP, you haven't even started AXP, whatever that is, the clock starts ticking when the day you pass your first division. And so that's not the day you get your score report, it's the day that you actually sit for and pass that first division.
And keep in mind, don't let that be something that keeps you from getting started.
Right.
5 years should be plenty of time for most people to be able to finish the exam. And that's just a matter of making that part of your plan and figuring out, so what if a fail does arise?
Right.
How do I navigate that? Do I take the test 60 days later, or do I take a little bit longer? But it's one of those things that I know a lot of people I've chatted with, when they do get a fail, they stop, take a year off.
Oh, don't do that.
And if you think of taking a year off, that gave you 3 less opportunities to ultimately succeed at that division. So keep that in mind.
Most candidates actually finish the entire exam in a little over 2 years. So if you think about that relative to that 5-year window, for a lot of candidates, that's a lot of cushion to be able to get through all of those divisions. So, when you fail that exam, I mean, it's natural to want to be able to just take a break, kind of be able to reset your mind. For some candidates, they want to just get right back into studying that same topic area, 60 days later, give it another try. For other candidates, you know what, I need to take a break from this particular topic area. I'm just going to switch gears and focus on another division, get through that, and then maybe come back to this first one. So either approach could be the right one for you. But the important thing is to try to stay away from those long breaks. It's much harder to get back into the rhythm of testing when you lose your momentum.
So there have been a few candidates who've asked about working as a freelancer for a licensed architect. Do you have to work directly for or direct employment to earn AXP credit? So I'll take this one real quick. AXP doesn't necessarily care what the working relationship is. We just care that you are paid for anything that requires employment type settings. So if you're working experience setting A, you do need to be paid for the work that you do in that office. But you could be a 1099, you could be a W-2, you could be employee, you could be contract, you could be a sole person that's just engaged with that firm. All we care is that that you're paid for the work that you're doing, and there is a person who has direct control and knowledge of the work that you're doing, and that's your supervisor. And depending upon some of these very unique situations, which do come across our desk every so often, is that sometimes we do need to help you determine where it fits within these things. And it's ultimately have that conversation with the architect that you're working with to best understand, do you qualify as experience setting A based upon the relationship that you have and the control that that person has over your work.
Yeah, great. All right, so we've got actually a follow-up now to the rolling clock question that I answered a few minutes ago. Do you also need to complete your AXP within that 5-year window of the rolling clock? And does the rolling clock start if you fail your first exam? Well, let me take that second question first. And no, the rolling clock does not start if you fail your first exam. So again, the rolling clock starts from the day that you pass your first exam. Now, what about the AXP part of that? Do you need to finish AXP also within that 5-year window?
No. There's no time limit to finishing AXP. As long as you're submitting your experience in a timely manner, none of that stuff will disappear once you have it in. And if it takes you 5, 10, 15 years to finish AXP, that's okay. Because once you have the exam component done, it's done.
Right.
And you don't have to worry about it. Yeah. However, as I always tell people, if it's 10, 15 years that you're waiting to get AXP done, make sure you check all NCARB emails to make sure you stay up on the latest and greatest if there are any rule changes or things that happen. But it's one of those things, if you get the exam done, figure out how to get the experience done as quickly as possible so you don't have to run into any issues.
Right. Just finish that process and get the license. So we have a question here from Natalie. Do you recommend using paid external study materials, or should I only rely on the ARE handbook? Well, first, again, I'll answer the second part first. I would not rely only on the ARE handbook. And I'm not sure if you were actually, Natalie, if you were actually asking, rely on the references listed in the ARE handbook. We have a lot of candidates who swear by those references. At the end of the handbook is the reference matrix. A lot of candidates have gotten to know that pretty well. We have a lot of candidates who swear by that list and say, just study what's on that list and you're going to be good to go. Again, we have other candidates who say, no, the third-party study materials are really great and I prefer using X, and I cannot tell you what X is. NCARB isn't affiliated with with the third-party test prep providers. So unfortunately, I'm not familiar with those specifically and can't recommend one. I think, again, it's finding what best fits you as a candidate. Again, I'll plug the ARE community here. There's a lot of discussion on the community about study materials and candidates sharing what works best for them, whether it's those test prep providers or the materials listed in the reference matrix or a combination of them. The great thing now, and I don't know about you, Martin, but when I was taking my ARE, it really was study books and flashcards, and that was about it. But I feel like for a lot of candidates now, there's a lot of great, in-person classes, online study groups, chances to meet in person, podcasts. There's a lot of different materials out there. And this is a great time to speak with your colleagues, connect with others on the community, contact your local AIA chapter. There's a lot of great resources out there for candidates. All right, this next question, actually, I'm going to send this one to you, Martin. Okay. Can you explain, this is from Ekaterina, can you explain what IPAL is and why it's beneficial?
Well, IPAL is the Integrated Path to Architectural License. So NCARB 3 years ago, launched this program that allowed schools of architecture to engage in this option at their school level. Now, what it basically does is that the school will design a program where they offer the accredited program, which is required by NAB, as well as they integrate the experience and the testing process into their curriculum. Not necessarily directly in the curriculum, but they make a path that helps a person ultimately meet all the requirements to get licensed at the point of graduation. So this isn't a bypassing any of the existing requirements. It's a weaving of all the requirements together, and the school creating a structured approach to help those students ultimately have everything at the point of graduation. Now, once they graduate, if they've completed their exams, finished AXP, once they graduate, have the transcripts, all that stuff gets sent to the board, and that board accepts that path, then they can have that license at that point. Now, let's say they started testing while they're in school, didn't finish portions of it, or only took a couple of divisions, or only had half of their AXP, they'll still need to finish that post-graduation to ultimately get their license or whatever additional requirements that state requires. So what is the benefit of this? Well, there are some students that are very eager to want to get all these things done together and all quickly. We found that so far, some of the people that have pursued this path are people that are later in their career or decided to go back to get their MArch and wanted to go in this path because it ultimately allowed them to weave all the stuff together.
Yeah, no, that can be a great benefit for those individuals, and it's exciting for NCARB to have more and more schools adopting IPAL programs. So there is, I'll say a follow-up question here once again to one of my previous questions about the approved test prep provider program. So kudos to those of you noting that on our website. Now, I'll clarify here, NCARB isn't affiliated with test prep providers in terms of developing content or providing extra information to test prep providers, but we do have the approved test prep provider program, which is a program through which test prep providers can submit their materials to NCARB for review. And that is purely looking at, do their materials cover everything that is in the test specification. So the test specification is the list of sections, objectives that is discussed in the ARE 5.0 handbook. And so the program really is just looking at those materials to make sure that, they're really covering everything that's on the exam. We review those materials one division at a time. And that can be a great way for candidates to feel some assurance that those materials are comprehensive and would make for reasonable study materials. Again, that program, those materials are actually not reviewed by NCARB staff. So that's an important thing to note for those of you who follow along with NCARB committees. We have a separate committee of architects who are not affiliated with test development, who review those materials through that test prep provider program. So if that's something you're interested in learning more about, you can see the screenshot from our website. And the list of providers who've been approved through that program is on our website for you.
So I'll take this next question from Grace.
Great.
If you submit AXP hours in the O category, who approves those hours? Now, as I mentioned with O, there are many different opportunities there, and they're all a little bit different in how that process is. Without going into the detail of each one of them, it's really good to go to page 16 in the AXP guidelines, because there's a nice little chart there that allows you to see who approves it, how many hours you can gain in that opportunity, as well as the links to further details. So that's the first thing I'm going to say is go to the AXP guidelines, page 16, and all these things are very easy to go around and navigate. That being said, depending on what type of experience you're gaining, that determines who's going to approve it. So if you're working for an engineer's office, it's going to be an engineer who's ultimately going to approve your experience. If you're working in an architecture office in another country, it's going to be that foreign architect who's approving your experience. If you're gaining experience here in the US in an architecture firm, you're going to be having an architect approving your experience who's licensed here in US or Canada. There are some opportunities where you're just submitting documents and ultimately NCARB will just review them and say, you're set. So just make sure you upload the documents that the AXP guidelines are asking you to have. So that to me is the best thing to say to answer that question is go to the guidelines, page 16, and it all is listed there. And when you go to the detail, read through the actual pages which talks about how to submit the experience and how it gets approved.
Now we have another question here, also experience related. Jared sent in, I work in California, but I'm thinking about moving elsewhere in a year or two. I know California has an extra hurdle or two. I'm sure you're talking about the California supplemental exam. Can I start here expecting to move and get licensed somewhere else?
So this is where I like to think about when you heard Michelle in the beginning when we started off talking about our 55 jurisdictions. I like to think of our country having 55 ways to gain a license. And even though you could technically, for the most part, start your licensure and get your first license in any of those 55 jurisdictions, ultimately you need to look at, well, where do I ultimately want to practice or where am I going to be practicing now? And you need to make sure you ultimately meet that jurisdiction's requirements. Now, in this question, let's say you were living in California and you're going, okay, I got to do the CSE, I got to potentially do some additional experience. Who knows? California will let you know what you need to do next.
Right.
But you go, well, I also know my company does a lot of projects in Nevada or a neighboring state or somewhere else. Maybe you get your first license there, get NCARB certified, then come back to California and complete whatever additional requirements you need to have at that point. So the NCARB certificate does not help you mitigate any of those additional experience requirements. What it basically does is allows you to port it and still need to meet those additional requirements.
Right. Great. All right. The university I graduated from is undergoing the accreditation process, but may not be accredited in time for my degree to be retroactively accredited. What other paths do I have to licensure? Is that process going to be different for me?
So this is where, in the beginning, when Michelle was talking about the NAB accredited degree programs, is that basically schools go through the accreditation process. If your school the program becomes accredited within 2 years of you receiving your degree diploma, you'll still meet the NCARB education standard, which for the most intensive purposes means you meet that equivalency to the accredited program. Now let's say if your degree is outside that 2-year window, which is what you're alluding to in your question, this is where you're going to start to look at that licensing requirements tool. And you're going to click on the question, is a degree from an accredited program required for licensure? And all the states who say no, then you're going to look at what their additional requirements are and figure out how to get your license. And like, for instance, some of the big ones to talk about, New York State, California, are just a couple that pop up because they're where a high concentration of architects are. That being said, there are a total of 16 jurisdictions that have these additional opportunities. So even without that accredited program, you can still gain a license in 16 jurisdictions. Again, with additional experience in most cases.
Right. That's great. That's really helpful for a lot of candidates to understand that, yes, you have options for sure. We have a question here from Sonnet. Are there any AXP opportunities for teaching building code to contractors?
I am not aware of anything that would be directly related to teaching. This is something, keep in mind, one thing is very important with AXP is it's about actually doing, and not to say that teaching is an aspect of learning that, but let's say you're in your firm, this situation, you're teaching contractors how to do it, but you're using the things that you know from your firm, you gained that experience already, is sort of how I think of it.
Right.
But there's not a direct correlation to teaching. So if all you're doing is just teaching and it's something all on your own outside of a work setting, then I wouldn't see that it would directly correlate to anything that qualifies for AXP currently.
All right, good to know, good to know. Madison asks, do supervisors have to approve reports, I assume AXP reports, within the reporting requirement timeframe in order to get 100% credit?
So going back to the reporting requirement is a requirement for you to submit the experience to your supervisor in a timely manner. Once you've clicked submit, if it takes 6 months, a year for your supervisor to approve it, it's not going to have any effects of the reporting requirement. Now, they can return for edits and you're all good. Hopefully your supervisors don't take 6 months or a year to approve things, that they do it in a timely manner as well. However, you are not subject to their delay in fulfilling their requirements. And I did want to step back real quick on that question before about teaching. Now, if you are counting that as AIA continuing ed and it qualifies for HSW credit and you've put it on your transcripts, because when you teach a course, you're allowed to, the first time you teach it, to actually qualify it as AIA HSW, then you could come that way. That's why I was like going, there's that opportunity that if you actually
approach,
shows up on your AIA transcripts, it could qualify through that path. That's that just popped in my head after.
Yeah, no, that's a great additional info there. All right, Courtney asks, will I see questions from other divisions when I sit for a different division? So again, we're talking about the exam now, so taking a step over to that. So let's say you're taking programming and analysis. Will you see any project planning and design questions? Well, the answer is no. So when we have committees of volunteer architects, they are subject matter experts and they write the contents, the items that candidates will see on the exam. Now all of those items are written to specific divisions and actually to specific objectives within those specific divisions. So there are no items that are shared between multiple divisions. Now some candidates might think, God, I saw something really similar though. Like I'm really sure that I had questions that were basically the same between PPD and PDD. Well, I can assure you, you do not see the same questions between multiple divisions. You might see things that are similar, though. I will grant you that. You know, a lot of candidates ask, well, when am I going to see structures, right? Because maybe they're used to the old ARE 4.0, where we had a whole division devoted to structures. Well, in 5.0, we don't have a structures division, of course. We have our exam is divided up by different kind of topic areas, practice areas, you can say. And the reality is you might actually see structures across multiple divisions of the ARE. Because we think about structures when we're designing an architectural project, we think about structures really from beginning to end. But the way we think about structures is going to change as the project evolves from schematic design through construction documentation all the way through construction. So while you might feel like you're seeing some similar questions, covering, gosh, I keep seeing questions about mechanical systems. Well, we think about mechanical systems or codes or structures or contracts and a lot of different aspects of all of these divisions, but we're going to think about them in different ways. So it's important to read through the handbook, all of the various objectives, and understand what's the overall gist of each of those divisions and the way we're thinking about those different topic areas as you're preparing for individual divisions.
So I want to do a quick note before we go into the next question.
Sure.
We do appear to be getting a lot of very individual questions about foreign architect paths and opportunities and some of the alternatives. If any of you fall outside the sort of standard path to licensure, which we've been talking about at this session, I highly recommend you contact our customer service, which we'll have that contact at the end of this session or right there at ncarb.org/contact us. And we can help cater the answers to you directly. But our goal at this was to sort of facilitate the sort of more standard path and trying to get everybody to the same page. And just as a heads up. Now, there's a great question here is, why doesn't NCARB provide score reports for past divisions of the ARE?
Okay. So, well, just to clarify, everyone gets a score report. So you can see the screenshot sort of in the back there on your screen where it says pass. Everyone is going to get a score report for sure that will list pass or fail for each division, the date that you took it. There's always a copy of your rolling clock. It's kind of hidden on your screen right now, but you'll always see that rolling clock, again, that reminder of where you are within your 5-year testing window. But But what you don't get when you pass the division, you don't get that descriptive feedback. So that chart that we spoke about earlier with the blue and the gray dots. So that is provided for candidates who fail, but it is not provided for candidates who pass. And the reason there is, frankly, it doesn't matter how well you did in each section of your division. What matters is that you passed. And the way that the licensure boards look at your performance on the ARE, they don't give you a different license depending on whether you passed with flying colors or you just barely eked by. All those boards want to know is that you passed all 6 divisions. And hopefully your employers as well. Your employers really just want to know that you passed and are now a competent architect. So we don't provide that feedback. The exam, remember, is a licensure exam. It's not a teaching tool. And so a pass is a pass. And it is just time to cheer yourself on, celebrate, and then be able to move on to the next division.
I think I have one more question.
Okay. Yes, I think we have time for the one more question, and then we're gonna need to wrap up here. So Natalie asks, do all my AXP hours need to be earned in the US, or can I earn hours working under a Canadian architect?
So again, going back to the other opportunities, now if you are gaining experience setting A, you need to be in an organization engaged in the lawful practice of architecture, so that could be in a foreign country, and your supervisor needs to have a US or Canadian license. So that's this work setting, experience setting A opportunity. Now, so you could be working for Gensler in Shanghai, for instance, and if you have a supervisor that's licensed US or Canada, you could count all of your experience in that foreign country.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Now, there are other ways of getting experience in another country, but they do need to be architecture related. Now, US and Canada, all of the experience opportunities apply. We don't differentiate. So you could be an engineer working in Canada, you could be working for a landscape architect or a designer construction lead in Canada. We accept that just as if it was in the US. But outside of US and Canada, if you're in another country, it does need to be architecture work. So you need to be working in an organization engaged in the practice of architecture. And then your supervisor needs to be licensed to practice architecture in that foreign country or another foreign country to qualify outside the US and Canada.
Great, good information there, differentiating that. Well, like we said, we are almost out of time here, so I think we're gonna wrap up here by sharing some key takeaways from this talk that we've had. So, Martin, what is a key takeaway that you want viewers to take away with them?
So as you've hopefully heard me say throughout the session, it's very important to create a plan. That is what gets you through this thing. Now, the thing is, plans can change, and that's okay, but always having a plan helps you ultimately succeed and finish this process. That can sometimes seem very undaunting, but if you have those steps ahead of you, you know you're constantly working towards them.
Great advice, and I am going to piggyback onto that and say, once you have your plan, just get started, right? Don't make a plan and then let it sit there. So just get started, and remember that NCARB is here to help. We've talked about a lot of resources today for both AXP and ARE. We hope that you take advantage of them on your way to getting licensed. So thank you all so much for joining us. We hope that you enjoyed today's webinar. If we didn't get a chance to answer your question, please, you can still leave it in the comment section below, and we will try to answer those questions on YouTube or on our website. And you can always contact our customer relations team for help through the Contact Us link on our website. So thank you all, and we're glad you could join us this afternoon.